Hello and welcome to the Poetryhood podcast. My name is Jamil Adas, and this right here is the first of many conversations that I have with poets. I sit down today with Namal Siddiqui, who has performed a bunch of times at our poetry nights, and we talk about her journey with poetry, her travels, some of her early inspirations, which includes a chocolate bar. And in between segments of the conversation, you'll hear the sound of a harmonica, such as this one, which will signify the beginning of an original poem written and read by Namal. I really enjoyed my conversation with Namal, and I hope you enjoy it too, and discover this wonderful poet with me. If you want to check out her poetry, you can find her on Instagram at Namal Siddiqui Poetry. That's NamalSiddiqui Happy poetry listening. So, hi Namal, how are you doing?
Good, how are you, Jamil?
I'm very good. So you're going to be the first conversation that I have with someone on this Poetryhood podcast. So I guess congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, amazing.
By the way, I like to call them conversations, not interviews. Like it's not going to be an interview because I don't want it to be one way, like just me asking a question and you answering. I want it to be two ways. So if you ever have any questions during the conversation, please don't hesitate to ask me. And if I ask you like a tough question and you're annoyed, and you can just be like, oh, well, you answer that question.
Awesome, I like that.
Throw it back at me. All right. So we were just talking about how... what were we talking about? Remind me now.
I can't remember. I completely forgot. It was an important point.
Yes, we were
talking. Maybe not that important.
We were talking about how we were listening to other poetry podcasts around, and what we'd hope this podcast to be. So I noticed how other podcasts, it was like super formal, and I want this one to be less formal. You know, just like poets meeting, talking about their lives. It doesn't even have to be about poetry, but we'll link it to poetry in one way or another.
Yeah, I think a lot of the other podcasts that I've been trying to listen to have been super formal or very. They sound just very like university school kind of, something that you're going to take class or some sort of lesson you're about to take. But yeah, I would like poetry to be a little bit more easier, casual, because a lot of people, as soon as they hear poetry, they think, this is something I don't do. No, it's not for me. So yeah, the idea and the concept is that everyone can listen. You don't have to particularly write, but it should be something that is easy flowing and comes to you,
Yeah, totally. Like if you have a normal conversation about poetry, not like, hi and welcome. Today we have Namal Siddiqui. She is the 3-time performer at the Poetryhood. Actually, you performed more than 3 times, right?
I have. It's been 2 years,
Yeah, seriously. Okay, great. So let's get started with like some funky questions, shall we?
Right.
All right. Okay, so start with introducing yourself and like, who are you? How did you get into the poetry game? And where are you from? Etc. etc.
Sure. So Namal, as you all know me, I don't know, but yeah, I was born and raised here in Dubai, and Sharjah. When it comes to poetry, I don't know. I've been writing since grade 4, and I've been like the school magazines that you have. I would make sure I had something in there every single year in English and Urdu. Urdu's my mother tongue, so it's just a habit. And I remember the first poem I ever wrote was about chocolate. My parents got me chocolate and I was so excited. I don't know why. It was my favorite one. I don't know what I was feeling at that time. And I went and wrote like a 4-line poem. And I was so proud of that as well. And eventually it just became a thing, writing in the school magazine every single year. And I just generally loved language and literature as subjects in school.
Okay.
when I was about 16, 17 years old, I had a lot of stuff already written, and I had this high school sweetheart who would also write poems. So we used to exchange, and I think that's where like it started developing a lot. Like it started getting serious, and anyway, we broke up, and whatever. But
what was getting serious? The relationship or the poetry?
The poetry definitely got serious, and I decided to I think I was 17, 18 when I decided to start a blog. And I was like, I'm just going to put it out there. I write a lot of stuff. I'm just going to see what happens. Before sharing, usually you're sort of, because it's stuff you write, it's your personal writing. So you're scared to share it with people. You don't know what everyone's going to think about your written work. But I just put it out there, and then I started noticing, there was a lot of, the readership was increasing, and for some reason there was people from USA were reading a lot, and then there was people from UAE, so people I would probably know here who I was sharing work with.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you go under your own name, or did you go under a pseudonym?
No, I was, I used to call myself Notions of Identity.
Oh, damn.
First. Yeah.
Nice. I don't know. That might beat my pseudonym. My pseudonym was Pondering Thoughts.
Pondering Thoughts. Yeah, I see where the whole thing comes from. Like, you're.
We're so corny, by the way. We're so cheesy.
So the thing is, I had it in Urdu as well. Notions of Identity was what was it called? Something about I don't know if you have that word in Urdu. Identity is shanacht.
How do you say notions of identity?
I'm just trying to think. I can't remember the word in Urdu anymore. But yeah, I had it in. So I thought of it in both ways, and but yeah, it was basically called Notions of Identity, and eventually changed it into Namal Siddiqui poetry.
Yeah.
And first it was a blog, and then eventually, the age of Instagram. So I started off with Instagram, and then I think I just left the blog there, because Instagram was enough, I think, for me at that point. With poetry, it's like that was my one place of putting down my thoughts, or, I was frustrated, I was happy, I was sad, I was angry, and that was one place where I could write down whatever. So I didn't have a habit of writing a diary, but there were a lot of entries at different points in my life, and they would turn into poetry. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, my brain just would work in that way when I wanted to put verses down.
Okay.
And then through the years, I realized something I discovered was that my mother writes herself. And she writes in Urdu, but she has amazing, beautiful poetry written, which I could never write that way in Urdu. My vocabulary isn't that great, but yeah,
you couldn't remember notions of identity. I mean,
exactly. That's really sad. But you should cut that part out. But yeah, she and I think a lot of a lot of that writing part comes from my mom. And since then I feel this great connection with my mother. Okay. And I love it.
Fantastic. I'm glad you said that, because I have a question for you.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that, the love for writing poetry, does it come from, it's like a nature nurture question. Do you think it comes from your genetics, or do you think it comes from your life experiences led you to write poetry?
I think there is a big chunk of it which is genetic as well. I think there is something about it. I definitely feel that connection with my mother, and we connect over writing and poetry and literature. So there is definitely that connection, but there's also it's something that you can develop with time as well. And if you've got someone who's sort of, you need to have an interest in in that world. Yeah. If you don't have it, then it's not going to happen. Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. So for instance, I also found people who would give me advice or, critique my work, which helped me a lot. Because at some point, I was limiting myself to within verses and this should rhyme, this should not rhyme. But then I had a few people tell me that just write. Don't think about structure. Just let it out. And that kind of guidance helped me in sort of developing my style eventually with time.
Yeah, it's a I noticed during my development with poetry is that at the beginning I was stuck in my own world of like how poetry should be, but then after reading so many other poets' work and looking at other people's performances, it opens your mind to like, oh, you know what? Maybe like you can play with it in so many different ways, not just the ways you think. And the more you observe other people, the more you're like, oh, there's that way. Oh, wait, there's that way too.
Yeah, I'd like to add here that 2 years ago or somewhat, when you asked me to do the spoken word workshop, that helped me a lot because I would always write. I never thought of performing my poetry. So, going through that workshop and doing the exercise of speaking out your words helped me to sort of thinking out loud, poetry. I didn't think of it that way. So that also changed the way I wrote stuff. It makes a difference.
Yeah, totally. So, What one huge lesson I learned from these spoken word workshops is that there are pieces for reading and there are pieces for writing. Yeah. And I never thought of that until I had those workshops. I've also performed a couple of pieces that were meant for reading on my own part, and I wish I learned that lesson earlier. But yeah, I actually wanted to go back to your first ever poem written.
Yes.
The one about the chocolate.
Yes.
I must ask, what is the chocolate? It gotta be like something crazy, like Lindt, like, no. Swiss chocolate. What was it, like a just general, like Maltesers or like Kit Kat?
It's not even Maltesers. You know what? Can I just say I don't remember?
No, come on, you gotta tell us.
I can't remember.
Make up the answer.
I really don't. But I really... Honestly, I don't remember what chocolate it was, but one of my favorite chocolates growing up was this, and you could probably like do a separate podcast for this. Things that Dubai kids, only those kids, Dubai kids would recognize. Do you remember Hobby?
Hobby? No, I don't.
It was this chocolate for like, 50 fils. Okay, wow. Cost 50 fils. And I don't know why I liked it. It had almonds inside it.
Okay. Like HOBBY?
Yeah, Hobby. And it was purple in color. I'm telling you, like anyone with a Dubai childhood, I'm sure they'd recognize it. Like those things like the Arij juice and the Capricin and the... Oh,
yes, of course.
And Oman chips. Yeah. So it's one of those things.
Okay. Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
It's off topic, but Capricin, like... Everyone knows Capricin in Dubai.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about Capricin now that we're on that subject. Okay. Are you the type of person who puts the straw from the top or you flip it and put it from the bottom?
From the top.
From the top? You put it through the designated hole of the Capricin?
Yes.
Oh my God. You're not a rebel like me. I like to turn it around.
I don't know what kind of stuff you're rebellious about. Definitely not Capricin. Not for me. Pedaling my foot back and forth, pressing on the brakes more often than one should. Red lights, oh so bright in the dark of the night. The radio runs out of songs to play, so I switch to my playlist, to the news, and then to my audiobook. Trying to make this trip educational, trying to make this time productive. Radio off, singing on. Today is a classical Pakistani singer. Yep, that is me tonight. Right shoulder aches. The air conditioning gets too cold, but the windows roll down, gets too hot. Crossing roads fearlessly and foolishly, risking their lives to get to bloody Subway on the other side, while I'm here on the longest ride of my life, annoying pedestrians. Damn right the road is my car's right. The guy next door takes a long puff off a cigarette. I can hear the creaking sound of the burning paper, throws it away when he's done. I always wonder if one of these days a car may catch fire with the remains of a dying cigarette. Because a spark is all you need to light a fire. I wonder a lot on my drive back home. I crawl on these four wheels as people watch TV, have dinner, spend quality time, practice a hobby and make babies or just make out. As normal people do, behind glittering window panes in the buildings that pass by. And so I wonder again, There is a difference in God's creation and man's. God's creation flourishes and multiplies. It enables, it provides, it builds, it resolves. Man, on the other hand, man is enslaved by his own creation, can't live with or without, entrapped in his own mind, its rules, its shortcomings. It takes, it divides. It takes, it divides. It takes, it divides. The despair of traffic jams have turned me to a poet, my dearie dear. So I find myself writing you a poem dangerously on my phone as I navigate with the other hand. Can't live with or without this fucking traffic jam.
So Namal, I've been reading your poetry for a while now, and I have noticed that your poetry tends to be inspired by your observations of your surroundings. And I always thought like you do a meticulous and careful job in wording your poems in a way to describe the environment that's around you, like a visual environment. So I believe, and correct me wrong if I'm wrong, traveling is important for your poetry and vice versa, because you get to see and experience new things that tickle your, let's call it, writing bone.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you if that is the case and how important is traveling for your poetry? And tell us about your travels in general.
I was thinking about this when I was coming here. Traveling is definitely an important part to be inspired. It's funny because when I'm actually in the place where I'm traveling and I don't end up writing stuff immediately. It's a process. So it's like if I'm somewhere for 5-6 days, I'll take it all in. I enjoy the place. I experience it, and if it's really had a huge impact on me, it takes time for the words to come out as well. A small example. There's this town called Fez in Morocco.
Okay.
It is beautiful. It's one of the oldest Sufi towns. It's got the oldest university in North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
For women. It's a place where you'll find, basically schools for Sufi, if you want to learn Sufism and whatnot. And all their, they assemble over there. You'll walk on the streets and you'll hear the chants, the zikrs, that they're holding together. And it's just intense. Like the town itself, you're walking in the streets and, it's like a huge maze, a labyrinth, and then suddenly a door opens and you look, on your right side, and there's another street inside that door, and then you can see more streets over there. So it was crazy. It was just beautiful, and it's surrounded by these hills where which have these really, really old ruins. They call them Marinid ruins, and there's tombs, and then there's a whole graveyard on the hills. Mm-hmm. So it's just eerie. Like, it's weird just being there. I was scared when I was there, but when I left, I was in love with Fez. I was like, this place is crazy. It's it's a mix of everything: marketplace and the Sufis and the hills around you, and it's just it leaves like a huge impact on you. But it took me a couple of weeks to take all that information in and then let it out. Mm-hmm. So, and when I wrote about it, I wrote paragraphs and paragraphs about just Fez. It was very prose and poetry, but it was somewhere in the middle. I don't know what to call that, but I just kept writing about it, and so much was happening over there. So I think it's definitely travel is important, but at the same time, travel doesn't have to be a part of your poetry writing. I mean, I could be I've written stuff, having the most boring days in my life, looking out the window of my house, and all I have is a parking lot, and I'm staring at it, and I'm like, okay. And you see the sun at its peak at some point, and then go back down. Yeah. And that sort of stuff inspires you too. So I think nature is a huge part.
Yeah, I like when I read poems that I notice that person was just sitting somewhere and they saw something so mundane, and they're just like, I'm going to use my poetry to like make it something grand.
Yeah.
And like, that's what poetry is at the end of the day sometimes. Like, it's
agreed.
Just like making something grand out of nothing.
I try to do that because there are some days that you're not super inspired. You're not traveling. You know, you're in your regular place and you're going to work. You're doing your regular stuff. What I try to do is, for instance, for me, I try to do this as a regular practice on Saturdays. I treat it as a me time, and this is my poetry time. So I give 2, 3, 4 hours of the morning to just writing. So I'll go to a cafe and I'll sit and I'll say whatever comes to your mind, just write it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I found myself not having a topic, but then looking at, observing people around me and how they're acting and reacting to their environment. It's got like a sort of a perspective. There's that poetry is different from the ones that I write when I'm on travel or, when it's not intended. So it becomes very reflective. Okay. So it's interesting. And you become more, you do become more, a lot more imaginative when you've got no topic. Don't try, I'm not saying try really hard, but just let it flow, just sit over there. That's why I give myself a few hours and whatever comes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea, especially if you're having like writer's block.
Yeah.
Which I'm experiencing right now, to be honest.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maybe we need some of those like 3-4 hours where we give ourselves some time to write.
Yep.
But yeah, writer's block. Yeah, I'm experiencing it right now. And I think that's the one thing I'm totally not doing is that I'm not forcing myself to sit there and just be like, this is my writing time and I got to just write something, whatever it is. But on the topic of Morocco, man, Morocco is like a really poetry-driven country.
Yep.
I've realized this. For example, when we host these poetry night events, we record the video, of course, and you can check out all the videos on YouTube by searching the Poetryhood. Plugging myself into my own show.
Please do so.
By the way, also, if you want to check out Poetry by Namal, you can search her on Instagram, Namal Siddiqui Poetry. Siddiqui, that's Siddiqui.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
That's right. Good job.
It took me only 2 years to get that right.
No, I like that because people don't usually spell Siddiqui right.
Yeah.
Or, there's no right way, but usually they use, because we have an extra U in our name, QUI, and some people do QI.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. But yeah, speaking of Morocco, like when we have these videos and I post them on YouTube or Facebook, even Instagram, and I boost these that content because I want to get more people to see it. And I would pick the countries. Like randomly one time I picked Morocco. Every time I would pick like a different set of countries in the MENA region. One time I just randomly picked Morocco, and man, for every $1, I got so much more views than any other country that I've ever selected. Like the video exploded with views. And I was just like, oh shit. I even needed to like I was afraid like, oh man, is this gonna like change my insights into like just Morocco all the way and everything's gonna become so low? I feel like Moroccans love poetry a lot. So much so that I'm thinking the next Poetics chapter, I truly think I'm gonna do this. It's gonna be in Morocco.
You should. So since I've been to Morocco twice, and obviously like I took a lot of pictures over there, and there was a lot of inspiration. So I wrote a lot of stuff about Marrakesh, and all the cities I'd been to, and I tag, Morocco, Marrakesh, Chefchaouen, Fez, whatever. And since that content I put up on my poetry account, I've got a lot of Moroccan followers. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So yeah, definitely, they love poetry and they're very receptive to it.
Shout out to all our Moroccan brothers and sisters.
Hello.
Okay, I have a question for you. I guess maybe you've answered it actually. I was gonna ask, what is like one unusual tip or trick that you have that you would give as an advice to like young writers out there?
Just write.
Yeah.
Just write.
Same one you were saying.
Yeah. Just write. I think.
Give yourself 3 hours to just write.
Yeah. Don't think about the hours as well. But like, if you feel like, so if you've got a thought in your head, try to put it down. This is like a dangerous example, but sometimes I'm driving and I have thoughts in my head. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And the thing is, when I'm driving, that's when I always get my thoughts. I don't know why.
Yeah, same.
So yeah, just keep. Just to complete that driving part, I end up like typing stuff on my notes, which is not a great idea. So you can record a voice note maybe. But
this message is not supported by the poetry.
Yes, don't drive and write poetry.
Nobody said anything about. They said don't text and drive.
Don't text and drive.
Poetry and drive.
But yeah, just keep writing and don't be scared to share it with people you trust. I would say, also not just everybody. When it comes to poetry, like I would share it with my siblings, just because they I don't know, those were the first people I would obviously trust. And then eventually, as I grew older, I made new friends within the industry, which is advertising. That's what I do during the day. I met a lot of people who were able to like sort of critique me, and that helped a lot. So don't be scared to share your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a really vulnerable thing to do.
Yes.
Is to write poetry and share it. So yeah, I would definitely say start with your loved ones. But also don't stop there, because, see, your loved ones is a double-edged sword.
Yes.
They'll support you, but they'll never tell you that you suck.
Yeah.
Unless like they're that type of loved ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, share it with people also that give you true feedback. So
definitely.
And that's usually other poets. Like, it's not going to be anyone but another poet who will give you like proper feedback that I feel like it's genuine, maybe like insightful as well.
Yeah, and like you said, when you start hanging out with people, similar kind of people, you will learn a lot more. Like, when you're watching someone read their poetry, or you oh, this is a different way of doing it. So yeah, I guess like-minded people as well, start hanging out with groups who are interested in arts and literature.
Yeah, totally. So another question for you, Namal. Who is your favorite poet? Or like a poet that really sinks in with you, that you like?
Well, when I was growing up, I would read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess she talks a lot about like there's love and there's death, and for some reason I like morbid things. So yeah, I enjoyed reading his poetry. I think this is a lot from my schooling, because we had a lot of these. These are all poets who write like really structured stuff. Like there's William Wordsworth and Robert Frost. But I see where that comes from. There's like they're romantics. They're hopeless romantics as well. And they're also super inspired by nature. So I think also the way I developed my style of writing, or my inspiration, kind of came from those places as well. In all these guys, Edgar Allan Poe, William Wordsworth, Robert Frost, William Blake, and like his poetry was really wordy and really intense. But I remember reading those, and I enjoyed reading those.
Okay, so actually, now that you mention all of that, I do see that in your writing. Like, I feel like your writing is structured, like, more than others.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe it's inspired by these.
I would also
folks.
have to put in there Rumi. Again, the whole. I have this issue with the way we perceive Rumi, the westernized Rumi version of poetry. It's very. It's all about love, but it's not divine love, but love between two people, I think. But his poetry actually is very Sufi. It's very spiritual.
Okay,
it talks about divine love.
So you're saying the way we've been thinking about it is just like love, like romantic
between
love.
two, yeah.
But you're saying he's more than just that. He's just like
he's actually not about romantic love. It's all about spiritual and divine love. For me, was reading Rumi was also really, really. He's one of those poets that really made an impact on my writing as well. And there was a part of a time of my life that I was reading him, and I was writing a lot of spiritual poetry as well. That's like almost a decade ago. Things are different now. But yeah. But yeah, Rumi is an interesting topic. We should touch that at some point. His poetry and how he writes.
Oh, please go ahead. I mean, to be honest with you, this is me confessing right now.
Yeah.
I have not read, if at all, of Rumi.
I haven't read everything of him, but I've read a lot.
Okay.
And when I talk to people who understand Persian, you know, they'll tell you like there's a lot of translation that isn't right. The Western world has really romanticized his poetry. It's not about romantic love. It's completely about divine and love and spirituality. And it's easy to derive romantic love from spiritual love, I guess.
Okay.
Especially
with like translations, like
exactly.
If you translate it under that context, then it's gonna sound like that.
And he's talking about his beloved, you know.
Okay.
Who's his beloved? He's talking about God. Mm-hmm. He's also talking about Shams at some point, you know, Shams, who was his teacher, who sort of like led him to writing poetry, because Rumi was originally a scholar. And when he met Shams, they were able to sort of the kind of exchange that they were able to have initiated Rumi's this poetic side. There's like a whole lot of story between Rumi and Shams as well, but it's all about.
So the word Shams is the teacher.
Yes.
For Rumi.
And Shams got lost at some point. Like, people were not happy about the connection that Rumi and Shams had. They would spend a lot of time together, and because he was a scholar, people wanted his attention as well. They somehow managed to get Shams sort of out of the way, and Rumi found himself alone. You know, he didn't have anyone to have that level of intellectual exchange. Mm-hmm. And he began to write like poetry, books and books. So he's written like there's tons of his books, you know, and the Mathnavi and whatnot. But yeah, he's not talking about romantic love. He's talking about, you know, there's a lot of like sort of love for yourself and divine love. Mm-hmm. But yeah, romantic love isn't part of it.
Have you ever read a translation of Rumi's work that you were told or you thought was actually accurate?
I don't know if it was accurate or not, but there is I've actually got quite a few books. But what I've recently started doing is a friend of mine has started learning Persian, especially so that he can understand Rumi's poetry.
For that purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he speaks Urdu, so it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but it adds to being able to learn Persian easier. And, you know, we sat down together a couple of times, and he shared that process with me, like, you know, translation. And again, it's not going to be drastically different, but just the way you perceive it,
changes the meaning.
So yeah. The automated voice says, "Sorry to keep you waiting." Morning routine, faces still wrinkled with the imprints of pillows and bedsheets. Concerned eyes, eyebrows twitching. The wet smell of shampoo hair and the morning breath of tardiness. Someone's headphone volume is too loud, and Beyonce is singing, "If you like it, then you should have put a ring on it." Laptop bags and paperwork, overly priced coffee, small talk. The clock is ticking. The air weighs down with anxiety, hope, and expectation. And this stuffed elevator moves up one floor at a time. Today, I smell a young man's sharp cologne. Yesterday, it was Mademoiselle by Coco. I love that perfume. 30 people at a time trying to get to their floors. The most frustrated ones trying to reach floor number 52. Sometimes it is nice to have the bald man with a big belly and a big suit. He creates space. The young lady with a stone face and an attitude like Madonna. A cute guy who only looks on the floor at his shoes, hands in pocket. Wait, is that a dimple on his cheek? This briefness of time and lack of space, this need to be kind and accommodate, reflects the true nature of man, conveniently nice, otherwise impatient and animalistic. I hate this elevator. Oh, finally, floor number 52 is here. Okay, I want to ask you, when did you discover that you like writing poetry, and where did you get your inspiration from? What? Tell me about that.
My poetry writing started pretty late. Definitely not in grade 4 about a piece of chocolate. I started writing, like the first time I wrote my first verse was probably when I first moved back to Dubai from Canada. I studied in university in Canada, and I moved back here because I couldn't find a job in Canada. And by the way, I studied accounting. I had a bachelor's degree in accounting. So I came back to Dubai and spent like 8 months looking for a job, and I couldn't for the life of me find a job. I started doing this thing called the CPA, basically 4 really difficult exams in accounting, and then you get like this license and certificate that can act as your master's degree in accounting. It's highly respected in the industry. So I started studying for that until I find a job. Most of my days were spent like in my room studying accounting, like numbers. And I felt like I needed a channel. Like I started going crazy. And I wasn't in a good place. Like I was pretty, I don't want to say depressed, because I don't think I was depressed. Like depressed is too harsh of a word, but I definitely wasn't in a good place. Let's just say that. And I really wanted to move back to Canada. I was looking for ways, and I was still applying to jobs in Canada. I had so many friends back in university that I really hated that I had left them. Just being in that moment, I was just like, I needed an outlet from the studying for the accounting. And I automatically just like random lines would come into my head and I'd just write them. And I had this Word document on my laptop, because I would be studying from my laptop. So I just like Alt tab to Microsoft Word, start writing a couple of things, and go away from the numbers for a little bit. And then I had this Microsoft Word document that was filled for 3 pages, random lines. Like I'd write 2 verses and I would be like, yeah, that was cool. And then back to studying. Eventually, I just combined a couple of lines together, and then like a story was flowing out of me into a poem. And I just wrote my first poem that way. And then from that, your other question was, so that answered part of your question, right? Like how?
What was the first poem?
What was the first poem? Oh yes, it was called Social Judgments.
Interesting.
Oh man.
Is it something you would share?
Yeah, I can share it. I think it's somewhere on DubaiPoetics.com. Check out DubaiPoetics.com for more writings of Jami. Here, let's look it up. This would be jokes.
Yeah.
I cannot remember when's the last time I revisited like my old writings, so this is gonna be interesting. DubaiPoets.com/Jamil-Adas. Okay.
Did you find it?
Oh man. Okay, that's funny because I didn't post that one first. The first poem that I posted. Okay, I'm gonna say the first poem that I posted on Dubai Poetics, because it seems that I didn't post Social Judgments. I don't know why. Probably it was probably shit. That's why. Okay, this one's called TikTok. Tick-tock the clock struck. Within pillowy dreams my head sunk. Bits of my past crackle into envisioned futures. Infinite dimensions of cognitive conjunctures. Exaltation of a story a brain conjured up. Sensing longevity never lasting. Tick-tock the time tornadoes. Unconscious of its everlasting run. Only aware of the fixed number of beats my heart can drum. The shut-eye will dream until it does not. The sun will rise while window panes are locked up. A moonlight will beam, yet no imaginary dream. Tick-tock the second hand strung. These words, figures in my brain, I must be beating. Soul yet not flung. Sounds are heard, 'tis thunder and rain, I will be brave. Tick-tock didn't matter, I'm unperturbed by the clock.
Such pondering thoughts.
So, okay, what I'm noticing reading this right now is that I've definitely learned that using big words does not mean you're good.
Yeah.
A lot of big words in there.
But it's nice.
I'm trying to show off
from your
like a
initial days.
Yeah,
And it's interesting that like
definitely a piece for reading, by the way.
yeah.
If for anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you should. I think that's a good exercise to read old stuff as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Because sometimes when I have the writer's block, I start looking back at old stuff, and I'm like, wow, that was good. You know, so you also rediscover sometimes some bits and pieces that are nice, or some are cringe-worthy as well.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes nice to go back and relook at work that gets you inspired as well.
Yeah, I agree, because you'll probably notice a lot of parts, just like right now, that were cringe. And you're like, okay, if I was that bad, that means I can do better than this right now.
Yeah, and also, or how else would you do it? You know what I mean?
Also, you'll notice some other parts that might have been good, and then you can like feed off that stuff that you might have lost throughout time. But now that you're reading your old stuff, you can grasp it again.
That's a good point, because sometimes, you know, I'll start writing a poem, and it'll be a very strong point in my head, and I'll write a few lines, and then I just don't know how to end it. And I actually feel like this is not the time for me to end it. Yeah. And I have revisited poems, you know, months later or even years later, and finished it off. And then it makes all the sense. The process of writing, it just reminded me of something else. There are times that I'd be at work in a meeting. Extreme, like, you know, we're all discussing numbers and, you know, way forward and how do we do this?
Corporate tower.
Exactly. And I can't stop the thought in my head, and I start typing stuff on my laptop or on my notebook, and people probably think I'm putting down notes, but I'm actually writing, and I just can't stop it, you know? So yeah, sometimes when it comes to you, it just comes.
I love when that happens.
Yeah, and it's amazing, yes.
Yeah. I have to admit that I tend to I linger on writing, and I wait for it to hit me rather than I labor to like find it.
Agreed.
I don't think it's a good thing. I think I should be doing part of the work. It's like that lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love and Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yes.
She has a great story about how she has a great way of thinking about creativity. So the way she says that creativity is something out of you. So you have to labor and work, and when creativity hits you, then it's great. Both of you can work together. But creativity will not always be there. Sometimes creativity will come onto you, and sometimes it won't.
Yeah.
So she actually says this. She goes like, before I start writing any project, any book, I sit down and I say out loud, as if creativity is like a living being around her. And she goes like, hey, creativity, I'm here. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do my part, and I'm going to labor away writing this book. I understand you're going to be sometimes with me, sometimes not with me. But you know, the faster you sit down with me and work together, the faster I can get this book published, the faster we can get this done, and the better we will... the better our work together will be. Yeah. So I'm here doing my part. I hope you do your part and join me on this journey, and let's get started. And that's how she starts writing her book.
Yeah, I like that. There are two ways, like you said. So she's got an objective. You know, there was a book she needs to complete. It's great, deadlines, amazing, which is super important as well. But what when you don't have an objective? You're not writing a book. But you want to write something, but you can't write. Like, you know.
Well, your objective is that you want to write something.
So for me, those 3-4 hours, on a Saturday morning at a cafe, that helps me a lot over there.
Yeah, that's the laboring part.
Yes.
That you're doing.
Yeah. There's another thing. So there's this thing. I'm trying to look for it. Charles Bukowski.
Oh, Charles Bukowski.
Yes. He wrote something on a poem on writing, and he's basically talking about. Don't force it, you know. If it's not something that you're yearning to write, that you don't want to pick the pen up and put down on paper, don't do it. So I'm looking for it online. Let me see really quickly.
Actually, you know what? If it is, that would be really funny. I remember she used Charles Bukowski as an example in her book Big Magic, and she was just like, I don't believe in that.
No way.
Yeah.
But I feel like there are two different ways of approaching it. That's it. Like
Yeah, I agree.
When I read his poem on this, I love it. He says, if it doesn't come bursting out of you in spite of everything, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it comes unasked out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. If you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen or hunched over your typewriter searching for words, don't do it. If you're doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you're doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If you have to sit there and rewrite it again and again, don't do it. There's some things I don't agree with that Charles Bukowski talks about. But anyway, if it's hard work just thinking about doing it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like somebody else, forget about it. So I love that the idea that, you know, don't force it on yourself. Mm-hmm. If it comes to you, let it flow. Don't force it. But at the same time, if you've got an objective and you've got deadlines to meet, so it really depends upon what you're trying to achieve out of it. You know, true. Elizabeth Gilbert probably had
like a company
deal,
that's
3 books, and she's got to finish it. And again, even like writing a book, like prose is different and poetry is different. I think poetry is definitely about feeling. You can still write prose with an objective, but poetry is a lot more about feeling. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, just to talk a little bit about my creative writing process is I most of the times wait for it to hit me.
Yeah.
So many times I've actually been like in bed just about to like pass out, and it's just like, oh my God, that's a good thing to write. I just like have to like turn over to the other side of the bed, like grab the phone, and it's like super dark and you don't want to open your eyes, but then the beam of the phone light hits you in the face.
And then you're up for the next 2-3 hours.
yeah, because of the goddamn blue light that's coming out.
So that brings another question. Do you write a lot on your phone, or do you also do you write down pen and paper?
Oh, I'm the tech type.
Yeah.
I write on my phone. It's just the pen and paper, I'm not holding it with me all the time.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just like, I want it in one place. That's where it's going to be.
Yeah.
What about yourself? I know, actually. I know the answer.
I do a lot of phone. Yes. you know, but when I'm traveling, I try to put my phone on the side, and I have a book, always have a book and a pen on me, a pencil. I can't use a pen while writing. It has to be a pencil.
Oh, because you want to erase and
I don't know, and it's just I like
the
feel of a pencil on a paper more than a pen. Yeah, and I have to say there's a difference in the writing over there as well.
Oh, really?
For sure.
So that breeds different types of poetry.
Definitely.
That's interesting.
It's more, you think a lot more. You take time, before you write your sentences down. Mm-hmm. That's what because on the phone is just a quick process. You're just typing.
Uh-huh.
Again, this is me. It might be different for everyone else.
Totally.
But with the pen on paper, it's definitely a different process.
Man, actually, now that you mention that, the very act of writing, it's a very meditative thing.
Totally.
I used to do this thing where I bought this really cool looking book that, empty pages, whatever you call it. And I would read books, and every time I'd read like a interesting paragraph or a paragraph that hit well, I would write the entire paragraph, sometimes pages of a book, into my notebook.
Yeah.
And it's just like copy paste. Like I'm just reading like, and then he said, and so on and so forth. And I finished the entire notebook. But that, like, I found that it's very meditative. Like I reflect and I think of every letter and every word of that sentence and paragraph. Yeah, I stopped doing that. I think I should go back to doing that as well.
It is. There's a poem I wrote. I was in Morocco again, in Marrakesh, and in the
goddamn Morocco's amazing.
I'm telling you, I love this place. I'm gonna sell it to everybody.
I need to go.
You should. It's I don't know. It's amazing. It's just lovely. Yeah, I don't have any words for Morocco. But yeah, I was in in Marrakesh, and their main square, which is called Jama al-Fana. And there's a lot happening over there. Like there's vendors, there's, there's cafes around you, people selling stuff and all kinds of stuff, food. There's pottery and whatnot, like tons and tons of activities happening, monkeys, performing and whatnot. So yeah, it's and even snakes. So just different things. And I was just sitting and then, watching. Again, I was sitting at a cafe, observing, and then I heard the azan. And at the same time, I see this old woman walking towards me. I'm like, oh man, she's gonna ask me for money or something because I'm a tourist and whatever. And then she walks past by me, and she walks over to this old man sitting on in the middle of the square, who's basically begging. She goes to him, and she herself looks like, my first instinct was like, she's gonna ask me for money.
So impoverished.
Exactly. So I thought she was also a beggar, but she walks over to the guy and puts money in his, the little thing that he had in his hands. And I'm like, wow, that was, me, first of all, like judging. And then the azan was going on at the back. And I felt like this was the most like holiest act of all, For me, I mean, it doesn't always necessarily have to be, you don't have to be a religious and super like spiritual person who prays 5 times a day. But even this little act is also, for me, extremely holy. And then I just started like, observing the place around. I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of things that we do in our regular life that they're part of, your faith. And I ended up writing a poem over there. And that was pen and paper. And it's all designed around what is holy. And then I answer it. What is holy? And then I answer it. What is holy? And then I answer it. So, yeah.
I like that a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like that lady probably did more than just give that guy money.
Yeah.
She's like changed your outlook on some stuff. She doesn't even know who the hell you
no
are.
Idea. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
That's really cool.
So people, please go to Morocco.
And get inspired.
What is holy? The woman holding her 2 children, the red sun in the background as she waits for her man to sell some local produce they acquired from a wholesaler on the way to the daily market. Or the old woman hardly able to walk, wearing a light pink jalaba, dropping a coin in the hands of the old man who begs for he must eat, as the azan reverberates in the atmosphere. What is holy? You, looking like a dream as I struggle to walk to our destination and I forget the undisputed realities of this life. What is holy? Survival or privilege? What is holy? Fear or love? What is holy? Pain or ignorance? What is holy? Who are we to decide?
Okay, Namal. So I have a very hypothetical question for you. Hypothetical in a pretty stupid way, but I think it would be funny to ask this to like every poet that I get on the podcast. Mm-hmm. So if you had a 3-word billboard in the busiest area of, whatever city, well, let's say Morocco, since we've been talking about Morocco. What 3 words would you put up on that billboard?
3 words on a billboard. When you say Morocco, it changes everything.
Okay, fine. It can be. Well, do you want it to be Morocco, or you can pick any country?
Let me. It's just generic. Let's keep it generic.
By the way, the point is to be corny. So don't stall on the corniness.
I would say, just do it.
Just.
Like, imagine like people walking on the street. I always imagine that, I guess this is part of being like a writer. and you're always observing people, and you're always thinking, everyone's got their story, right? Like I'm sitting here writing, sitting in a cafe and like trying to look at people and think about what their life story would be. And I'm trying to do something in my life too. Not everyone has like different aspects of life. There's not just one thing that they do. So
right.
yeah.
All right, Namal. I
just
asked,
do it.
I asked for 3 words, not
Just
a whole
do
paragraph.
it. Fine. See, I can never have 3 words. Never enough.
I'm just kidding.
Just do it, guys. Whatever you want to do, just do it.
By the way, everyone's gonna mistake it for a Nike advertisement. Like,
yeah, I was gonna
Just
mention
do
Nike. Yeah, it is. It is.
yeah.
It's,
for a second, I thought it was just did it.
I'm the
But,
spokesperson. No, I'm not.
If
yeah,
Nike wants to support this podcast, please.
that would be lovely.
Imagine that, Nike supporting a poetry podcast. How random would that be?
Yeah,
But you never know.
you never know.
All right. So I guess, okay, I've never had one of those where I have to end the podcast. So I don't know how
Really?
to end it. Thank you so much for your time, Namal. This has been very insightful.
Well, you've never ended a podcast?
Well, I've ended a podcast on my other podcast.
Exactly.
But that
How
was
did you do
like
it?
that was like a group effort with the
Oh.
Isra, It's just like, all right, nice.
It's been a pleasure, Jamil.
Honestly, with that other podcast, which is Hamburger Generation, Gilles el Hamburger, if you guys want to listen to it, it's all about storytelling and it's just if you have a cool story, you come on it and you tell us your stories. But yeah, on that podcast, usually the way we end it is just like, cool, yeah,
Cool.
that's a nice
Nice.
story. All right, and then
Good
we just
stuff.
turn it off, and then we have an outro that we record separately, Isra and I.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's how we do
Okay.
it. So maybe I can do that here.
Yeah, you can.
Or we can just shake on it.
Well,
Thank you so much, Namal,
thank
for
you
your
so
time.
much, Jamil.
Cheers. Yeah.
Don't end it. Don't end it the way you didn't want it to be.
Well, you know what we're ending it with? We're ending it with some banter, which is what we're doing right now.
Yes.
So that was good.
And usually Jamil says peace out.
Yeah. So peace out, y'all.